Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Look what I have for you. Cindy, almost jumping with joy, reached into her purse to pull out her present for me. Will, the girl's boyfriend, asked in surprise. Actually, I'm the one who should be giving gifts. Why is that? Cindy asked, hiding behind her back what she had just taken out of her bag. I like giving presents too. Will smiled embarrassedly, changing from foot to foot. Well, I'm a man, he said proudly. A man should be the one to surprise his beloved, not the other way around. All the more he embarrassed himself even more. The look of his loving eyes went to the sky. Well, I'd rather give you presents, especially since Cindy asked resentfully, especially since you're richer than me, yes. Her gaze immediately faded. She sat down tiredly on the bench, still clutching her present in her hands. Does it really matter to you that much? No, to cheer up, he answered and immediately sat down beside her, taking her hand. I don't want you to work. We have exams coming up, and you're still wearing your makeup. I've told you so many times. Why don't I give you money, and you'll spend more time with me? I don't need a handout. Cindy's big blue eyes flashed with indignation. Especially not from your parents. I don't even take money from my mom. They have nothing to do with it. Will jerked his hand away from his girlfriend's palm. Why do you dislike my parents so much? They don't like me. Will sharply answered her. Let's not pretend they don't. I understand perfectly well. They don't think I'm right for you. They think I'm too poor. For someone like you. That's not true. Will jumped to his feet. Do they like you? He was suddenly quiet, looking around. Even if you're right, he said quietly. Maybe they don't love you that much, yeah. But who cares? The important thing is that I love you. I'll give you the money too. Cindy smiled tiredly at Will. It's not your money. You don't have your own money. You don't work. Before Will could make excuses, she shook her head negatively, signaling that the conversation was over. You'd better see what I have. With those words, she finally presented her gift. Cindy stretched her thin arms forward, and hiding something in her palms, she raised her head, looking into her lover's eyes. After a short silence, smiling, she opened her palms. The girl had costume jewelry in her hands, two rather large, eye-catching pendants made of bronze. They were two halves of one whole. The key-shaped pendant and the heart-shaped pendant with the key cut out were connected, but were meant for two different chains. The quirky shape of the key clearly matched the heart. Will sat back down on the bench, held out his hands to the pendant. Wow, he marveled, though obviously a 17-year-old boy couldn't be that surprised by costume jewelry. They're keychains. They're not for me. Pulled Cindy's hand away, laughing. These are pendants for two. They need to be hung on a chain. But at me, she visibly looked embarrassed. I didn't have enough money for them. How cool. We'll continue to marvel. That's okay. I'll buy the chains. So he took the gift in his hands, scrutinizing it. I'll have a key, yeah. Don't you have a heart? Cindy continued to laugh. I'll have the key and you'll have the heart. But I'm a man. I'm the one who finds the key to your heart, not you to mine. Will smiled gratefully, raising his hand with the jewelry to the light to examine it more closely. It should be the other way around. But I want the key. She pouted her lips resentfully. Well, if you insist, sure, take it. Will laughed. All right, all right. He handed Cindy a pendant in the shape of a key. Then he took his wallet out of the back pocket of his jeans and put the pendant in the change compartment. Soon I'll buy us chains and we'll wear your present properly. Just the plain ones, Cindy said, rising from the bench. She pulled her beige scarf tighter around her. She took her fox leather gloves out of her purse. Are you cold? The guy asked her. Yeah, she replied. Let's go home. I haven't done home yet. And you, Will waved his hand dismissively. And I'm not going to do it. Come on, I'll walk you out. Cindy shook her head disapprovingly, but immediately took the young man under her elbow. Come on. Cindy and Will had met in kindergarten. Even their teacher noted that it was as if these kids were destined for each other by fate. That's how well they fared. They were still very young, but they couldn't tell each other apart, always babbling. We're just playing and drawing together. Cindy was the only child with whom small and rather greedy. Will shared his toys with. Will himself, in turn, was the only child who was not offended by the then quite belligerent Cindy. The children's parents were initially amused to see the strong friendship of their offspring. Look how cute they are. Time after time they repeated, picking up their children from kindergarten. Later, when the children grew up and already went to school, parents began to worry about their children's excessively close socialization. The thing is that Cindy and Will were as if from different worlds. The boys' parents were big businessmen, owning their own chain of hotels. Cindy, on the other hand, had only one mom. The woman pulled on her daughter, working 3 jobs at the same time. The first to worry, as usual, were Will's rich parents. "She's not your level," they said to their child. They discreetly pointing a finger at the rather cheap clothes. "Girls, find friends of your own circle," his mom and dad repeated. Cindy's mother, for her part, became concerned a little later, the moment the very real romance began between her daughter and the son of the rich. "He's not good enough for you?" shouted the worried woman. "You'll never be together." Wendy, Cindy's mother, sobbed as her own daughter ran off to go on a date with her childhood friend. "He'll break his heart crying," she said. William's parents, of course, kept up with her. "Never mess with beggars." Time after time they repeated to their son, almost forbidding him to choose his own friends. In fact, when the children were very young, there was no such visible difference between the financial situation of the families. Yes, Cindy's mom was much poorer than Will's parents, but at least she could afford the same paid kindergarten. However, this state of affairs did not last long. Every year, Will's parents were getting richer because their business was flourishing. Cindy's mom, on the contrary, was losing her finances. Having been downsized in her field of work, she had once been a good financial director, but after the recession, she lost everything. And so it was. An unequal couple in every sense, a rich man's son and a cleaning lady's daughter. Cindy and Will originally went to the same school. But when the parents, the boys, became even richer, they took their son out of public school, giving him to a private school where he studied, starting from the 5th grade. They hoped that Will would finally find friends from his circle of the same rich and high status in society. This was generally the case. Quite sociable and communicative, Will quickly found a common language with his new classmates and made new friends. However, he did not forget about Cindy. School children independently agreed, met after school or on weekends. At first, it was just a friendship, tested over the years. Cindy and Will could no longer imagine their lives without each other. After all, they had been friends since early childhood. So they communicated from the 5th to the 9th grade until they realized that they were in love with each other up to their ears. Will was the first to confess his love. A year before their serious conversation, the guy realized that he loved and had always loved his best friend, Cindy. At first, he was shy about his feelings, afraid of losing her as a friend, afraid of scaring her or pushing her away. He hid his love behind the mask of friendship, worrying at night that someone else might be the first to confess his love to her. Often classes at his school ended earlier than at Cindy's, and Will came every day to meet his friend after school, coming that way one spring day on the eve of summer vacation. Will was heartbroken to find his best friend, Wilka, still with another kid. Then he realized it was time to act, and a few days later he confessed to Cindy that he had always loved her. To his surprise and indescribable joy, he found out that Cindy is not indifferent to him. It turned out that the schoolgirl loved him as much as he had loved her all these years. So a pair of high school seniors began their first teenage relationship. A relationship full of love, joint plans, and hopes, but which were hardly destined to have a future. After all, they were not a couple of major, and the girl came from a poor family. Well, stretched the field, stopping abruptly, having never reached her house, until tomorrow. Suddenly she asked, "What? What do you mean?" The guy stopped following her, looking at the girl in surprise. "It's still 300 meters to your house." "Yeah, I know," she turned away, staring off into the distance. "It's just Mom. I don't want her to see us together. So it's better if we say goodbye here. It's not like I'm going up to your place," parried Will. "I'll walk you to the elevator and that's it. You don't know who might get in your way." I don't like your entrance or the neighborhood in general. It's not that. I'm just afraid she might see us together if she looks out the window at the wrong time. Let's just split up here for me. It'll be fine. I promise I'll call you as soon as I get to my room, Cindy. Do you really think she doesn't know we're together? He asked irritably. Your mom, like my parents, should get over it. We're getting married anyway. Whether they support us or not doesn't matter. It's our life. You're right. Will, of course I'm right. She stood on the strokes, kissing her lover on the cheek. But let's not get them all worked up about it. Okay, Will said sadly, kissing the girl back. But you make sure you call. Okay, already leaving, said Cindy. In a couple of seconds, she was already disappearing in the dark yards. Cindy had always been a rather strong and independent girl. Ever since she was a little girl, she preferred boys' games and entertainment. Little Paul was never interested in dolls or dollhouses. She always wanted something more dynamic, something more active and not, as she put it, girlish. Maybe that was why she befriended Will. Or maybe the kids really were destined for each other. Always and everywhere the field took leading roles, always and everywhere she wanted to control everything and be in charge. The girl's mom, Wendy, thought it was all about the little girl growing up without a male upbringing. Cindy was already 17 years old, but she never found out what happened to her father. As a child, her mother said that her father was a sailor and had just gone on a long voyage. Later, she apparently forgot the old lie and said her father was her secret agent. Then she said her father was an astronaut, then that he was a famous person. And then, when Cindy turned 10, her mother said that her father left for another country for good. Cindy was worried at first, seeing how the other children were loved by their fathers, but gradually came to terms with the idea that she would never know her father's love. Despite her rather delicate and doll-like appearance, Cindy was a real tough cookie. She was only 7 years old when Wendy was made redundant. Unfortunately, the child had to grow up very early. Ever since then, Wendy had gone into a real depression, forced to work 3 low-paying jobs. And from that very moment, Cindy became an adult and independent once and for all. Her mother was never at home, so the girl had to look after herself for 8 years, when her friend Will didn't even know where food came from on the kitchen table. Cindy already knew how to cook not only for herself, but also for her mom. At the age of 14, Cindy had already started her first job. However, Wendy was not able to appreciate the labors of her daughter on merit-tired and unloved jobs. The unhappy woman simply did not have the energy to entertain her daughter, to communicate with her, or to learn about her experiences and events in her life. As a result, Cindy grew up to be her own stern, independent self only at the age of 15, when she was already fully providing for all of her current needs on her own. Her mother began to pay attention to her child, finding out that the girl was still socializing the same way, and even more so, was already dating the son of rich parents. Wendy became furious. She did not want the field to be with him. No good can come from these rich people, the woman thought, trying to shield her daughter from Will's influence, but it was too late. Cindy was already a mature, independent girl. Not only was she fully formed as a person, but she also had her own stable job, distributing cosmetics for a well-known brand. It was too late to raise her. Where have you been? The woman asked rudely. Jumped out of the bedroom when they heard the keys jingling. Who gave you permission to leave the house? Mom, I do not need your permission indifferently, replied Cindy Razuvev. I went to work during the day, then went for a walk. With whom? Asked Cindy's mom, losing patience. You were with him again. Yes, with him. No, lied the schoolgirl. Mom, I'm tired. I can't stand my brain. How many times do I have to tell you? Don't hang out with that rich guy. Wendy, button up your robe. Following her daughter around while she went about her business. Mark my words, he'll show his true colors. Cindy would have liked to lie to her mother again, saying that she had no contact with Will. But her mother's tone drove her on, and she replied sharply, how can you know that? We love each other. No, you don't, the woman parried. You are too young to know what love is. Listen, mother, I've already lived. I know what I'm talking about. That boy is no good for you. He can only hurt you. Mind your own business, Cindy replied in a harsh tone. As if you know what love is. We're getting married after we turn 18. Do you like it or not? With those words, Cindy dashed to her room and slammed the door forcefully behind her. Oh, Wendy clutched at her heart. This guy was just pissing her off. She grabbed the handle of the door leading to her daughter's room. But after a moment's thought, she decided to leave her child alone. We'll have to come up with a plan to keep them apart. The woman thought to herself, what a shiphole. Will thought as he left the neighborhood where his girlfriend lived. How can you even live here? He reasoned with disgust, looking at the 5-story houses and old shabby children's playgrounds, on which some scum crowded. The autumn wind harshly conceived under his fancy coat. Hands flashed. Was it for a lollipop from the thick, dense clouds? It was beginning to rain on the nettles. Oh shit, mentally Will muttered, almost stepping into a rather large puddle. I can't wait for her to move out of here. Every time Will, one way or another, had to be in this neighborhood, his heart sank into his heels, and there were only 2 words in his head. I want to go home. Even though he'd been to Cindy's house quite often, he'd never quite gotten used to the locals. It was beautiful. Dull, shabby houses, holes in the asphalt, dark, scary entryways that smelled of cat pee. He could still remember the first time he'd been at Cindy's house. Of course, he couldn't tell his friend that it was a total nightmare. But he remembered the smell of cheap tobacco and alcohol, which was the smell of the entryway where the girl lived, and what it was like in her apartment. Old repairs, dull furniture, tiny rooms. Of course he loved Cindy, but to be here in this horrible place where she lived was beyond him. Sometimes he was even glad that her mother was adamantly against it. Of course, Will wasn't used to this kind of life. Will was used to the beautiful and prosperous life of the rich. His family were not some heirs to fortunes. That is, Will was not born with a golden spoon in his mouth, but his life was always a little better than the others. He was always bought everything he wanted to have. He always had the best things. His room was renovated every time the boy had a new favorite cartoon, and every time the new furnishings completely repeated the scenery of his favorite universe. Will's parents never said no to him. And in those years, when the family business went sharply uphill, the little Will was completely spoiled. His parents loved their only son. They cherished and nurtured him. It could be said that they did not demand anything from him in return, if it were not for one thing. The stumbling block was Cindy. Will's mother and father were confused when they realized what kind of girl their son had fallen in love with. Of course, they didn't hate Cindy. That would have been too much even for them. However, they did have a couple questions about Cindy's financial situation. The daughter of either a cleaning lady or a dishwasher. No such couple. There was no way they wanted their own child, especially who knows what they could expect from her. These beggars, reasoned Clara, the boy's mother, what can you take from them? Surely Cindy's mother must be a drunk or even a drug user. How else could the family be allowed to descend to this level of living? No, he can't talk to her, she told her husband. Of course he can't. John confirmed her words. Especially since we know exactly how this is going to end. She's pregnant, and she'll blackmail us for money. There's no communication between them. There is no way we can allow that. When Will and poor Cindy were just friends in kindergarten, Clara and John paid no attention. At some point, however briefly, they had time to think that this girl wasn't so bad. Quite interesting, intelligent, beautiful. She even protected little Will by getting in the way of the mean boys. When Cindy and Will were friends, there was no reason to panic in the beginning either. But friends and friends, they thought. But when Will was transferred to another school, and he continued to lurk in a not-so-wealthy neighborhood, his parents got nervous. You're not going to hang out with her. She's not your equal. They scolded their son. On the one hand, they were understandable. The neighborhood in which Cindy lived was indeed quite dangerous, but on the other hand, quite competent businessmen were not the most intelligent parents and did not have time to realize that their prohibitions only stir up their son's interest in the girl. They tolerated when school children only just socialized. But when they started dating, such an event really knocked them out of their rut. They forbade their son to see the beggar girl, forcibly removed him from school. even hired a security guard, but will manage to outwit him time after time and find a way to sneak away to his beloved. Clara and John were confused. They didn't know what to do about it, especially since long ago, around the time when their business had grown a lot, they had made an unspoken agreement that their son would marry the daughter of their business partners. So what's the deal now? I'm at home shouted grudgingly to Will. He swore under his breath, took off his street clothes, and wandered dejectedly into the kitchen to get something to eat. There behind the bar sat the boy's mother. She gave her son a stern look, and Will realized there would be a scandal. "Where have you been?" Clara asked the girl. "How many times do I have to tell you the same thing, Will? She's no good for you." "Ma." "John," lazily replied the schoolboy, pulling a can of soda out of the fridge. "So the mood is lousy. I'm looking for you and your nonsense. It's not for you to know delusions," replied the gaunt woman. "Sit down. I have some important news for you." "Oh yeah, ironic," Will asked. "I think I already know your big news. I love Cindy and will be with her always. And you think what you want." In response, Clara smiled demurely at Will and she began affectionately. "Do you remember when you used to want to go to Haiti?" he asked in surprise. "What the hell is that? I don't know any Haiti." Clara shook her head. "Remember how you loved pirate movies? Do you remember where the pirates live on TARDIS?" The woman splashed her hands together in self-satisfaction. "I remember," nodding, the boy answered. "I remember as a child dreamed of going there. By the way, why didn't you take me there?" "Oh, honey, it just happened." She got up from the counter, walked over to her son. "But now it's time for us to go there," she solemnly announced, "for the next vacation. What do you think? How's that for a vacation? Man, it's cool." Will was visibly excited, as if he had changed from a grown-up guy to a small child in an instant. He clapped his hands as he used to do when he was a kid. And now even his youthful stubble didn't stop him from looking like a boy. "Maybe we'll take off for the weekend, eh? But a weekend's too short. It's better to stay away from school a little longer. So we'll wait for the vacation for a couple of years," Will rejoiced. He walked over to his mother and leaned over to give her a smack on the cheek. Taking the bag of pictures, he then walked towards his room. In his head, he looked like an adult, but still boyish and Will at heart. Pictures of sword battles formed fleetingly, big three-corner flags hanging from belts, and of course, treasure. Will ran into the room with a sprint, jumped on his large bed, giving still childish fantasies. There was little that could ruin his mood, but a memory of Cindy immediately popped into his head. Shit, he thought with annoyance. It's not like I'm going to be able to leave her for the whole vacation. He rose from the bed briefly, thinking, and headed confidently back to the kitchen, where his mother was still in the kitchen. "And I'm not going," he said, lifting his chin proudly. "I'm not going anywhere without Cindy." And Sergeyevna smiled demurely and contentedly, as if she had only expected that. "I know, son," suddenly she said. "Daddy and I thought long and hard and decided that we could take Cindy with us on a trip. That doesn't change the fact that Dad and I are against your relationship, though. But I think you'd love it. And then closer to your adulthood, we'll think about what to do with you." She looked at her son carefully. "What do you say? Do you want to take Cindy with us?" Unable to remember himself from amazement, Will asked. "What is it with you?" The boy's mother continued to smile coldly. She had her own special plan. "We just want to please our son. Is that a bad thing?" she said softly. "No, it's cool. But I'm afraid the field trip won't be at your expense. She's a proud girl." "Leave it to me," Clara replied. "I think I can negotiate with her mom. Just don't say anything to her until after the vacation. Let it be a surprise for the girl." "Okay," Will answered cheerfully. And again, kissed his mother already on the other cheek. The schoolboy did not realize that his mother had thought of something to separate him from his beloved once and for all. Cindy and Will were walking along the embankment, holding hands. Cindy was saying something about her work, scolding some girls in the process. Novi almost didn't listen to his favorite. All his thoughts were there on the cakes. And how could he restrain himself from telling Cindy about the trip ahead of time? He continued to walk slowly, trying to nod in time with the narration to his mind. Suddenly, a word flew from the narration of the field, reminding the boy that there was a present in his pocket. He abruptly stopped the chains. He thought and smiling, looked at Cindy carefully. "What are you up to?" she asked, forced to stop with him. "Are you not listening to me at all?" "You're doing fine. You're doing great," Will answered proudly. "It's just that I remembered that I prepared a present for you." Was she visibly embarrassed? "You shouldn't have been," Will said quietly, smiling full mouth. "You should have," Will replied and reached into his pants pocket. After a couple of seconds, he pulled out a small baggie, then pulled out 2 identical gold chains. "One for you and one for me for the pendants." Pleased at his own generosity, he said no. Paula became visibly nervous. "Oh my God, Will, they're gold." "You fool. The pendants are just costume jewelry. It's just stupid to buy expensive chains for bling." "They're not bling," Will said angrily and reached into his pocket again. He pulled out his wallet, opened it, and pulled out a heart-shaped pendant. A couple of seconds later, it was hanging around his neck on a gold chain. "Well, it's beautiful because you gave it to me," joyfully he said and pulled the girl to him, kissing her. Cindy couldn't hold back a smile. "Definitely a fool," she said quietly, hesitating to take the expensive gift in her hands. At that moment, Will's cell phone rang, and he rolled his eyes and answered the incoming call. "Yes, Dad, you were good at everything." There was a rough and very loud shout from his father. 250,000 at a time. "Do you even know where the money comes from?" he yelled. The change he had just picked up immediately fell out of Cindy's hands. Either the phone or John's voice was so loud that the girl heard every word he said. "Spend it on his girl." "Yeah," yelled the kid's dad. "Don't you realize she's using you?" Cindy's lips quivered with resentment. Her eyes immediately became wet from the tears that came in. "They'll never accept me," she thought with annoyance. At the same moment, Will became embarrassed. Will took a couple of steps away, but the angry man's voice could be heard even from there to her ears. Cindy reached out angrily and so hurt. "Sooner or later, this chicken will fly from you, and you neighbor from our family all the money." Cindy turned abruptly, about to go. But Will, seeing the girl's worries, dropped the call and was next to her in a flash. "Where are you going?" "Baby?" he asked, looking into her eyes. "What happened?" "I heard everything," she answered, barely keeping herself from crying. "But why? Why did you buy those chains?" "I told you I wanted simple and inexpensive ones." "Do you have any idea what your parents think of me? We'll never be together ever." "What is this nonsense?" Will was indignant. "Why do you keep saying that?" He, not realizing how he felt, stepped in. "Maybe you just don't want to be with me." "Parents aren't an obstacle. What's your problem?" she shouted back, and tears spurted from her eyes. "Your parents will never let you marry me." "So what?" Will followed her and turned to shouting himself. "I don't care. I don't need them. I need their fucking money. I can provide for us myself. When we grow up." Cindy even laughed through bitter tears. "When we grow up?" She asked again. "Well, I've already grown up like a little kid. It's just you. You always act like you're 12 years old playing with toys, watching children's movies. You're like a child trapped in an adult's body. Your father's right. You don't know the value of money. What are you without your parents? You don't know much yourself, and other guys your age are already working. What about you?" He resented the other guys, clenching his fists in anger. How would you know about the others? He couldn't remember himself from the rage. He ripped off his chain, took off the pendant, put it in his pocket, went to the place where Cindy was standing before and picked up the second chain from the asphalt. Taking both pieces of jewelry in his hands by force, shoved them into the girl's bag. "I bought this for you with panic," he said. "Can you give it to your grown-up boyfriends? Since you're more interested in them than Chow." With those words, he quickly walked off in the other direction, leaving Cindy all alone in the same minute. Two different women sat across from each other in a small, cheap cafe. They had no idea that at that moment their children had broken up in a big way. But if they had known, they probably both would have cried with happiness. Oh, how was it to their advantage? After a long pause, Clara interrupted the long silence. "Have you thought about your decision? Are you in?" she asked, reached for a cup of coffee. "Mind you, I'm in it with or without you." It's in your best interest to agree. Wendy stepped forward. May I clarify if I understand you correctly? You're suggesting that I tell my daughter that you and your family are taking her on vacation and paying for her tickets and last-minute stay. I should tell her that Will specifically changed his mind about taking her with him and asked her not to come to the airport. What makes you think she'll believe that? Clara smiled demurely. Because it has to happen at the last moment, when we're already at the airport. I stole my son's cell phone. It's going to be pretty easy. He usually starts buying up everything in duty-free. I don't remember anything around exactly when he gets distracted. I'll take his cell phone and text Cindy on his behalf that he's over her, then just throw it away for good measure. Will he buy a new phone and a new SIM card? We're not coming back from vacation. We're going straight to England. He doesn't know about it yet. His son will see that Cindy hasn't come to the airport and thinks she's fallen out of love with him. And then everything falls into place. They'll forget about each other once and for all. My Will already has a fiancée, though he doesn't know anything about her yet. Your daughter, I'm sure, will find someone else. Our children will finally be separated. She moved forward with a predatory smile. And to make sure you don't change your mind, I'll pay you a tidy sum to keep quiet and help me with my plan. It's a deal. Wendy smiled back. You know, I'd do it without the money. I don't trust people like you, Will, and I don't trust you either. But since you offered, so be it. I'll take the money from you. She was defiantly embarrassing her nose. Like I said, I don't know if I can trust you, but I don't have much choice. I've got your little boy on my mind. In fact, I've thought about separating them myself. I hope you can be trusted. In any case, I'll take the deal. The two women exchanged equal glances. Wendy was the first to rise from her seat. We're literally a couple of weeks away from vacation, and I'd have to work very hard to convince Paula to come with you. She's a proud girl. She won't even take money from me. I hope it works out. I'll be waiting for your call. It's a deal, Clara replied dryly. She nodded her head instead of saying goodbye and looked sternly in Wendy's direction as she watched her leave the hall and waited for the failed wedding party to leave the premises. Time passed and Cindy and Will had completely stopped communicating because of their quarrel. Earlier, if the couple had quarreled, the first to come to make up was Will. As a rule, he waited for the girl after school to apologize and continue the relationship without resentment and conflict. This time, something was different. Will had been so hurt by Cindy's words that other guys his age were acting like adults. And really, how could she know that? Resentment tormented the teenager every night when he fell asleep, and every morning when he opened his eyes. He thought bitterly about one thing, who she was dating, how she knew about the others. He felt humiliated and crushed. What did she mean by saying Will was acting like a child? Also didn't like the chains. What did she want anyway? The guy was so upset, he made a proud decision. She should come this time, make up with her after all. What was his fault? All he did was give her a gift. Was that something to be resented for? For the first time in their entire friendship and relationship, Will didn't go to meet Cindy from school. The bitterness of what she said was too strong. So the boy went home after school, shutting himself in his room. He lay there for a long time, staring stupidly at the screen of his smartphone. She would definitely call. With hope, he thought. He passed a day 2 weeks, but none of the teenagers never did. The first step toward reconciliation. Will was nervous beyond belief. What if she found another guy? With fear, he thought. He didn't want to give up his principles, but his love for Cindy was stronger anyway. He was about to dial her phone number when suddenly his mother knocked on his room. Well, shouted the disgruntled schoolboy. I'm busy. Let's do it later. But Clara had already unceremoniously entered the room. Will, I wanted to tell you something. The teenager rolled his eyes tiredly and immediately hid his cell phone under the pillow. Well, he asked irritably again. Wolf, what's the matter with you? The mother's eyebrows went up. Did something happen at school? Did you have a fight with someone? Grabbed her head. Is it really with Cindy? Will the long drill lead the mother not a trusting glance? Would she suddenly be able to offer sound advice? Absurd. Will knew perfectly well how his parents felt about Cindy. But right now, he needed support so badly. Ma, he started hesitantly. Cindy and I did have a fight. I didn't want to make up first, but she's not making the first move either. Do you think I should call her, or should I come over right away? I can't be without her, I can't. The boy's mother shook her head pretentiously, sadly, and made serious Will eyes. But if she doesn't put up, the first one, then she doesn't need it, she said softly. Or maybe she just hasn't gotten over your fight yet. In any case, to call, and certainly do not come to her. Especially not in this neighborhood. Ma. Will pounded his fist on the pillow in anger. I shouldn't have told you. I'm sorry, she raised her hands conciliatorily. Especially since I know exactly when you'll make up. Whence he raised himself up on his elbows interestedly. Arranged with Cindy's mom, and your girlfriend will fly with us on vacation. That's really great. Here, if you don't believe with these words. Clara took out her cell phone and showed her son a text message from Wendy. She wrote that her daughter had agreed to the trip and was looking forward to it. No way. Will was sincerely surprised. He snatched the phone from his mother's hands and checked Wendy's number with the one he had recorded. Indeed, it was she who had texted Cool. Do you think the field is ready to make up with me? Well, of course she is. Clara smiled caustically. So don't worry, you'll make up at the airport. You don't want to call her before then. She might want to apologize to you there. And don't write her anything. They're girls, and touchy. I was one myself. Then I know it. It's better to wait, believe me. A pause, so to speak. Do you think Will rubbed his chin thoughtfully? You're probably right. A preoccupied William ran around the stalls of the duty-free zone. While waiting for his flight, he kept spending and spending money, regardless of the price tags, to buy some candy or toilet water, which he had never used in his life. He loved duty-free so much that he didn't pay attention to what was going on around him. That's why he never noticed his cell phone was missing. An hour later, when Will seemed to have bought everything he could possibly want, he wandered tiredly over to his parents' house. Mom, Dad. I'm tired. He said and plopped down in his chair when our plane was already there. I want to rest. Pretty soon will. Satisfied with herself, said the guy's mom. Well, tell me what you bought. Just little things, he replied lazily. Stop. He got up out of his chair. Where's Cindy? She's already here, isn't she? Yes. Oh, darling, not yet. Clara answered quietly. So you called her and asked her where she was. She's about to check in, and she's still not there. What kind of irresponsible girl is that? Will started fumbling nervously in his pockets. Shit, his phone's gone, Mom. Where's my phone? John intervened. Will, you're a big boy. You should keep an eye on your own things. We're gonna be dealing with you like a little kid for a long time. You'll be 18 soon. Will seemed to stop listening. His mind was on one thing. Where had Cindy gone? He began to fidget nervously in one place, and then another, repeating, Where is she? Where? The boy seemed ready to faint from excitement. How could he not notice that Cindy was still gone? And his cell phone was lost, too. Call her, he pleaded at last. We don't have her number. Honey, with fake sadness, answered Will's mom. Let me dial Golly. She pulled out her phone, put the call on speaker when the beeps went silent, and the familiar voice of Cindy's mom could be heard on the other end. Will's heart skipped a few beats. Clara said a polite hello. Wendy, hello. Where's your Cindy? Our flight's coming up, and she's still not here. Doesn't your son read your messages? There was a woman's disgruntled voice. Cindy has already written to him. She's not coming, and she doesn't want to see him anymore. Will felt as if he had forgotten how to breathe. He quickly snatched the phone out of his mother's hands and screamed as loud as he could. Turning to Wendy, I don't believe you. This can't be happening, Wendy laughed. Anything can be. Boy, one had to think about how one should behave. There were sounds from the phone, and Wendy could be heard getting up from her seat and going somewhere. There was a creak of the door. Will heard Wendy asking her daughter Cindy a question. Do you want to talk to Will? The boy's heart pounded with excitement. He held his breath, waiting to see what his girlfriend would say. No, Cindy's voice gave out. Will slowly lowered himself into the chair. His hands shook instantly. "You see," Wendy replied triumphantly. And then she dropped the call. Clara shrugged and hid her cell phone in her purse. "I'm so sorry." "Honey," she pretended to sympathize, not waiting for what her son had to say. She reached into her purse again to get something out. Here, she shoved some papers into her son's hands. "Read it. So you don't think we didn't want to take Paula with us. We bought her tickets, paid for her hotel. She didn't want to go." She softened her tone. "I don't know what happened in there. But believe me, it's for the best for your mother. Forget this begging and live your life. Relax and take a break from everything." Clara walked over to her son and pulled him into a hug. Clara clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't feel bad, she was never right for you anyway." The woman hugged her son with motherly love. "Oh," she exclaimed our flight. Almost immediately after the events described above, Will and his parents boarded the plane. Upon arrival, the first thing the teenager did was to buy a new cell phone and a SIM card. Finding himself in the familiar element, he first of all was going to write his favorite message. But having installed on the new phone the necessary social network, he was horrified to find that Cindy deleted her account search. Her on other resources also did not give any results. From that very day, the guy's heart was broken. From that very day, he realized that he could never love again. Will and his parents never went back immediately from the island. Another flight to another country far from their homeland was waiting for them. There Will finished school, found new friends, and started a new life. How did Cindy's life turn out? It was unknown to him. At some point, as it seemed to him, he forgot about the girl forever. As the years went by, Will grew older. And now he is no longer a head and a teenager, but quite a mature and adult man. Sometimes he very rarely remembered his first love. He wondered if there had been such a strong love between him and Cindy. Maybe his mother had been right then, and he was still half a child's fantasy. Maybe it was just teenage angst, a hormonal outburst, and Cindy had never been half as good as he'd thought she was in those years. Maybe she was. William actually stopped thinking about her a long time ago. His life had taken on new colors. Another country, another language, new friends. 6 years had passed since the teenagers had broken up. And here Will is already an adult, but still completely dependent on his parents' return to his hometown. There he was waiting for a wedding with a girl with whom he had not even been acquainted yet, and managing one of his parents' new hotels. Did he ever think of Cindy? As he stepped off the plane, breathing in the light smell of his homeland, of course he did. But I didn't even think about trying to find her and start talking to her. Why? 6 long years later, Will was already sure that that youthful love wasn't really real. So childish, innocent games. Having flown home, a couple of days later he met his future wife, a young, quite pretty girl named Jenna, who had just turned 18. On her, as however, and on Will himself was evident, the girl was not burning desire to marry. But what could be done? They both knew very well with their parents. It was better not to argue, so as not to lose the funding. After a month, Will and his bride Jenna were already sitting in a long limousine, heading to the registry office. The parents of the newlyweds had organized a real celebration. A bunch of unknown guests, a fancy restaurant, fireworks. But on the way, the newlyweds and their guests met an unexpected, insanely long traffic jam. Somewhere far ahead, there was a major traffic accident. After a long half-hour of standing still, a tired and irritated Will had nothing to do. Struck up a conversation with his wife-to-be. "How are you?" he asked, embarrassed. Not tired yet. Tired. And how? The girl was indignant, fixed neat false hair. "How long can you stand still?" "I want to finish all this and have fun. And I do too." Will smiled, looking the girl in the eye. He looked her over from head to toe. She was very pretty after all. Long blonde hair, plump lips, good figure. He looked at her carefully. "Jenna, look, we've been over this. But how do you feel about this wedding? I mean, we've only known each other for a little while. It's okay." She smiled sweetly. "Yeah, when my parents told me I was getting married soon, I panicked. Maybe my future hubby would turn out to be a freak. But I stopped worrying when I saw you. It's okay, he's cute, She winked and Will. I think we're gonna be okay. I think so too. Will winked back and placed his palm on the girl's leg. She gave him a promising smile. After another half an hour, the guy couldn't stand sitting in one place any longer. Decided to get out of the limo to look around. Jenna, let's go for a breather. He asked. Look, our guests are all out, and we're all sitting here like recluse. Who knows how long we'll be stuck in this traffic? Oh no, said the girl. I'd rather sit here. With these words, she went to the minibar, taking out a bottle of champagne. And you stay, since we're stuck here, let's spend some time drinking and chatting. Will guiltily smiled back. Still, he got out of the car to stretch his legs. Of course, drinking champagne with a pretty girl was a very tempting proposition, but he couldn't sit in one place any longer. He opened the doors wide and the bright sunlight immediately hit his eyes. William got out of the car and looked around. His hometown didn't seem to have changed. Over the years, he walked along the cars standing in traffic, every now and then greeting the wedding guests he didn't know. When Will was about to get back into the limousine, his gaze was drawn to one rather strange figure. A beggar's man, he could tell, but so familiar. He squinted, covering his eyes with the palm of his hand against the sun. This can't be it. He thought to himself a little away from the road she was standing. In fact, he wouldn't have been so surprised by the encounter. It was to be expected after all. After all, Will had returned, and she, of course, lived here as before. But so soon, and under such circumstances. There was another small but very odd detail. Embarrassed by the guy, she was wearing a janitor's uniform. The young janitor was briskly sweeping leaves, paying no attention to the people passing by. No way. Cindy, with horror, thought the young man and inwardly shuddered. No, what's gotten into you to do a little janitorial work? He was finally convinced that it was really his Cindy. Without thinking, he immediately rushed toward her. As the boy ran across the road to meet his first love, his heart beat harder and his palms immediately sweated like a 15-year-old boy's. It really was Cindy, still as beautiful, still as young. It seemed that in the 6 years that the young people had not seen each other, she had not changed one bit. Only Nick and her sad look gave away all the pain she'd been through in his absence. Will's throat was immediately dry, but he took a step towards Cindy with almost shaky legs. He said quietly, Cindy, is it really you? From the surprise of the janitor check, literally jumped on the spot. What is frightened? She asked. Are you talking to me? Cindy, tears came to Will's eyes. I can't believe it's you. He held out his hand to her, but the janitor sneered instantly. You're the young man you wanted to identify, I guess. She asked, finally looking into the eyes of her interlocutor. Cindy, quietly, almost crying, he said again. He felt dizzy. He felt as if the ground had gone out from under his feet. He had so many questions. Why hadn't she come to the airport then? Why had she left him? Why hadn't she called? Why hadn't she told him she'd fallen out of love over the phone? Thoughts swirled in his head, but the only thing he could ask was this. You're a janitor, but why did her eyes flash with rage? I'm sorry, man, I don't know you. She blurted out. What is stunned? Asked the guy. It's me. Will, how could you forget me? The girl forcefully clutched the broom in her hands. On the bones one. Knuckles, I don't know you, she repeated her words. Cindy, what are you doing? He took a careful step in her direction, but was forced to jump back, almost getting hit on the head with the broom handle. And outraged boy, what are you doing, Cindy? Oh, come on, it's me, Will. Get away from me. Don't interfere with my work, Cindy said angrily. William would have thought he'd really made his mark if it hadn't been for one thing, but deep down in his subconscious mind he knew for sure. It was her, his Cindy, still just as belligerent, still just as confident. He knew he'd recognize that voice out of 1,000. Would have recognized those big blue eyes. Will shied away a little, but didn't leave completely, only asked bitterly, why did you leave me, Cindy? Why? The employee's face changed in an instant. It seemed to read resentment, anger, longing. But she did not answer him, only raised her chin proudly. Man, mind your own business. Don't interfere with my work. I've already told you. You were wrong to say that. She turned and walked away. "No, Cindy, wait, don't go." Will shouted after her. In a couple of steps, he was able to catch up with the strap and grab her arm. "I'm not leaving until you answer my questions. What happened to you? Why are you working as a janitor? What about your dreams of going to medical school?" He pulled the girl to him, looking into her eyes. "Why did you do this to me?" Quietly but insistently he asked. Cindy jerked sharply to release from his grip, and without thinking long enough, she snapped her pursuer's neck. There was a disgruntled exclamation from the man. "What are you doing?" Cindy, deciding not to answer, threw her broom and ran away. Will stared at her in silence, shocked to the core. "Cindy." He said her name quietly, rubbing his injured neck lightly. A familiar voice came from behind him. Jenna, who had suddenly appeared behind him, stretched out again. "What are you standing there for?" Perplexed, she asked. The traffic had already cleared. Everyone had almost reached the registry office. "And you disappeared." She giggled softly that she had decided to run away her own wedding. Yay. Jokingly, the girl threatened with her finger. "Good thing I caught you. Let's go quickly." Will, still in shock, didn't know what to say to her. He received from Cindy on the neck, but he realized that still, despite everything, he loved and loves her for real. Always her alone, the only one in the whole world. The boy didn't even look in the direction of his fiancée. His gaze was still focused on the spot where his first love stood a couple seconds ago. What, without even turning around at Jenna's voice? He interjected. "That girl, did you see where she ran to?" What other girl? Jenna approached the guy from behind and put her hand on his shoulder. "Will, what's wrong with you? You're standing here all alone." Finally, Will looked back and carefully looked his fiancée in the eyes. "Like you didn't see anyone." "I think I saw her." "Her who?" "Silly?" Laughing, Jenna asked. "Our limo is parked." "Run over there. Hurry up before your parents start fighting." Parents regretfully said Will. "All right, let's go." Some 40 minutes later, Will and Jenna were standing in the registry office, looking like happy newlyweds. They both cheerfully said yes to the registrar's question. What next? The next thing you know, it was a real fun wedding. That day, Will got drunker than he'd ever gotten drunk before. And it wasn't because Will was so excited about Cindy's marriage. He couldn't get her out of his mind, and the lavish wedding was going marvelously. All the guests, including the parents of the newlyweds, were delighted with the ceremony. Everyone was having fun, walking around, dancing. All except Will, because he couldn't get out of his thoughts. One question was, why did Cindy become a janitor? Had her life not turned out the way she dreamed it would? Will, who was already quite tipsy, was sitting on his seat when his mother came up to him. "Will, congratulations," with joy in her voice. The woman said, "You're all grown up now. How pathetic are you as a spouse? Tell me, she's beautiful. Why don't you say something?" Will raised glassy eyes. "Mom, what do you think?" he began stammering. "Why do you think Cindy left me then?" "What?" Mother was outraged. "What other half? How did you ever think of her?" "Oh, Will, you're a married man now. Drop your childish nonsense." "Mom, tell me." Drunken Son kept insisting on this topic of conversation. "Tell me, why did she leave me? You know, I still love her." He almost cried. William quietly through his teeth and firmly whispered at his son Clara. Looking around, immediately shut up. "What are you talking about? Who the hell is Cindy? Forget about that beggar, once and for all." "But I love her unexpectedly," Will declared loudly, rising from where he was sitting. In his hands, he was holding a bottle of whiskey. The jacket in which the young man had married had been thrown somewhere, and for the manifested edge of the snow-white shirt came out of his pants. "I love her drunkenly," he insisted. "And quite loudly, you hear, Mom, I love her, period. I want everyone to know." The banquet hall erupted in applause. Probably the guests naively believed that the drunken groom was talking about his new spouse. Some shouted, "Good for you, she loves you too." And only the distraught mother knew who they were talking about. Will continued to hiss at the woman. "Will, stop this circus at once." But Will seemed to have forgotten that he was talking to his mother a second ago. He, barely able to stay on his feet, wandered to the center of the hall, grabbing Jenna under the arm. He yelled, "You saw her. Tell me you've seen surprised, but also pretty drunk." Jenna only grudgingly obeyed Will. "You've had enough, haven't you?" she said, supporting her husband under her arms. "And before that you will not be able to fulfill the conjugal duty," and laughed, but drunk, and tried to pronounce his favorite name. "Where is he? Where is she? Where is my beloved?" the unhappy man asked, looking his wife straight in the eye. "Okay, that's it." Still laughing, said Jenna. She waved to someone, and in a couple of seconds, the drunken groom was carried to his room. More adequate friends were on hand, cackling and teasing a few days after the wedding. Will and Jenna were flying in for their wedding trip. Will lazily sprawled out in his airplane seat, playing uncomplicated games on his smartphone. Jenna, sitting next to him, was flipping through a magazine. She suddenly decided to break the long silence. She called her husband again, playfully flashing her eyes. "And when we return home from the honeymoon, what do you plan to do?" The young man, without distracting from the game, shrugged indifferently, the same as always. "And this is what?" the girl continued to inquire. "I still don't know where you worked before we got married." "Just like our parents, yes, the hotel business." Will laughed snidely. "There's more. I've never worked, and I'm not going to do anything when money is already flowing into my hands." "Why do you ask? Are you afraid we won't have enough money?" "No. I mean, well, yes, I am, honestly," she admitted. "My dad said that when I get married, my husband will provide for me." "No, I understand that our parents will give us money anyway. But don't you want to earn money yourself?" "I don't want to," Will replied with a laugh. "Why would I want to do that when I already have everything? Of course, Dad offered to take over one of his new hotels, but I don't want to." "I don't need it, Jenna." "Well," the girl's embarrassed, "you're a man. A man's got to have something to aspire to, something to dream about. That's what poor men need. Why should I? I've already achieved everything when I was born." He gave his wife a sly look. Then he went back to playing the phone. "What are you gonna do? If you want it so badly, you can do it yourself." Jenna laughed. "No, I don't want Anna either. I'm a girl. My job is just to be beautiful." She smiled flirtatiously and put her hand on Will's arm, forcing him to put the phone aside. "Do you think you love me yet?" The expression on William's face changed in an instant. He put the phone aside, covering the eyes in his head. Then came the logical question: what is love? Since the day Will was a teenager, from the day Cindy had left him, he had decided that he could never love again. But how can you take a 17-year-old boy's reasoning seriously? Especially since he was hurt, humiliated, and angry. Will himself did not know the answer to his question. Back when he lived in England, it seemed to him that all that love story with the little one was just a figment of his imagination for today. Today, he was no longer seriously convinced of it. The boy remembered his wedding day daily, and it wasn't because he'd made a happy marriage. It was because of her. With Cindy, he wasn't sure that meeting was real. The very next day, he decided that it was all a product of his altered imagination. His imagination was still jammed in the morning, and then in the car with Jenna. However, he knew one thing: Cindy still stirred his soul. She turned out to be the scar that nagged again and ached after years of separation. And even though he had dreamed that meeting, even though in reality Cindy was long married and happily nursing her children, it doesn't matter where she is. It didn't matter what she did for a living. All that mattered was that Will loved this girl with all his heart and soul. He knew for sure that he was ready to take her any court. No one's or director's married lady or rambunctious maiden. None of that mattered to him at all. It was on his wedding day that Will realized that he had loved Cindy always and would love her until his last breath. It was the day he married someone else that he realized he had loved the same person, Cindy, all his life. The same person he had known his entire conscious life. But what now? Now Will was flying first class on an airplane to the islands. Sitting next to him was a gorgeous blonde, part-time his legal wife. In his glass was expensive champagne, and from the porthole you could already see the ocean. If you don't go into details, Will's life was the truest fairy tale. Rich parents of beat beauty, a wife and a whole life ahead of him. Long ago, when Will was a child, He dreamed of growing up and supporting his family on his own. Dreamed of taking a bullet for a wife. Dreamed of giving gifts to his mother with the money he earned himself. As a child, Will would often daydream with his head flying off into a fantasy world. He and Cindy also often dreamed together, imagining what their future adult life would be like. Cindy always wanted to become a medical doctor. Will promised his beloved that for her sake he would open his own clinic. Even when the boy was already studying in England, he dreamed of independence. The day when his father promised his son to give under his control one of his hotels, Will was happier than ever. A new adult life, family, and happy. Departing for the dream hometown, the boys took off with the airplane. What will my wife be like? Will I be able to run an entire hotel? These were the questions the guy was asking himself, anticipating his new life. Who knew his dreams were destined to be shattered? Who knew that Cindy's mojo would ruin his mood so badly after the wedding and that vision? Will realized he wanted nothing more. He turned down his father's offer to run the hotel, given up on the idea that he and Jenna could really make something work. Now he wasn't living, he was floating through life. His life was quite good. The guy was taken out of his thoughts by the irritated voice of his wife. Will unhappily whispered she, "Did you fall asleep, or what?" "Actually, I'm asking you important questions." And Will opened his eyes sharply, shaking his head sorry. "I've been thinking." "What were you asking?" "I've forgotten." "Oh, come on." Jenna laughed nervously. "I was asking how do you think you've grown to love me?" "Will, instantly by nickname." He covered his eyes again, leaning back in the airplane seats. "No, Jenna, I'm sorry. I don't think I could ever love you." The newlywed couple flew to the islands for their honeymoon vacation. The couple's parents ponied up the money to put them up in the best hotel. After the confession that Will made on the airplane, the relationship between them went sour, and each of them distanced from the other. Although Will already, after landing 1,000 times, apologized to his wife, brazenly lied that he just had too much champagne and did not know what he was saying. Jenna was visibly distant. At first, the couple tried for the sake of decency to spend time together. But then they had separated, and each was doing his own thing, not interested in his partner's leisure time. Will collapsed lazily on a chaise lounge, lazily pulling up another alcoholic cocktail. The bright warm sun was shining. The young husband's skin visibly darkened with each new day, and the thoughts in his head became more and more benevolent and simply positive. Around him was the most real paradise, tall, wonderful palm trees, cast shade, carefully protecting his eyes from the sun around him. Every now and then beautiful girls with chocolate skin tone passed by. The air was progressive and slightly humid. Around Will flew drunkenly, shields, the aroma of fresh coconuts. After another long-legged beauty passed the guy, he whistled. How well the cocktails had done their job. And now Will was already open to the world, and he wanted simple worldly joys. Then William suddenly remembered the purpose of his trip. Shit, I have a wife, he thought. He felt a pang of shame, like a snowball. Why did I say I wouldn't love her? Then on the airplane, Will felt sad and ashamed of what he'd said. She really wanted this to work out. What kind of person am I? Will rose leisurely from the chaise lounge. I should apologize to her again. He thought, I have to tell her that our relationship still has a chance, even if it's not true. Continuing to drown himself in shame, Will walked with a confident gait toward the room where the newlyweds were staying. He wanted so badly to apologize to Jenna. After all, she was still very young. Passing the reception, Will stopped. He called the receptionist and asked her to find him a gorgeous bouquet of tropical flowers. A couple of minutes later, a smiling girl brought out a basket of flowers and asking to put it on his account. He went to the room to offer his wife his sincere apologies. He was already approaching the door when he smelled something wrong. He knew for sure that at that time Jenna, who was not used to changing her habits, was sleeping sweetly. But why were their voices coming from their room? There seemed to be a man there. The confused Will opened the room with the key card and, seeing what was going on there with a rumble, dropped the basket with flowers from his hands. Jenna, what the hell is that? He asked. He sobered up instantly. We just got married and you're already in bed with someone else. Jenna clumsily covered her breasts with her hands. Oh, that's not quite what you think. She cast a worried glance at the man who was lying naked in the same bed with her. This is not it. What is this? Will was indignant. Aren't you ashamed Jenna cheated on her husband on her honeymoon? And how can we live together after that? Will shifted his gaze to the man who was also ridiculously covering his intimate parts. Man, why don't you say something? Do you even know she's married? Jenna's lover guiltily smiled. Bro. I'm sorry, I didn't know honestly. Just don't tell my wife. Oh hey, you guys are out of your fucking minds. Shaking with anger, Will shouted. He wanted to throw the gift and into the lovers and leave immediately. Away from this room and from this hotel forever. But then his entrepreneurial spirit kicked in. Who's going to take my word for it? He asked aloud and immediately pulled out his smartphone, taking pictures of his naked wife and the equally naked man who was in bed with her. He smiled victoriously. This is the picture I will show our parents, Jenna. I thought you were different, young and innocent, and you don't dare. The girl pulled her clothes back on. Yeah, and you don't dare show him that picture. Delete it immediately, and you have no right to be upset with me. We both knew this was a marriage of convenience, especially since you said you could never love me. But I would never cheat on you, Jenna, shouted back Will. Does marriage mean nothing to you? Nothing at all. She answered rudely, showing her true colors. I don't care about you or your parents. You disgust me, asshole. I'll live my life as I want. Will was taken aback. Why did you sleep with me in the first place, if I disgusted you? Perplexed, he asked. Why did you ask about love? Why all this circus? We could have made a deal on the beach. Jenna laughed, looking him straight in the face. So what of it? I like attention from men. What's the big deal? I asked about love because I thought you'd be of some use. What can I take from you? You're not going to work. You don't have any aspirations. Anyway, do whatever you want. Just don't you dare tell your parents about it and ruin our life together. Frustrated, Will never found something to respond to the Hulk. A little softer. He quietly walked out of the room, never uttering another word. That day, Will did not remember himself from the amount of alcohol he drank. It is not known how he managed to hastily gather his things, checking out of the hotel and clutching in his hands the very pendant that his beloved had once given him. Loaded into a cab bound for the airport. That day, Will realized that this was not the life he wanted. He realized that if he wanted a drop of happiness, it was time to pull himself together and start acting on his own. No longer talking to the storefront, his wife, or answering her calls. William bought a hot airline ticket and flew to his native land, sitting in the airplane. He kept clutching in his hands the pendant that he had once received as a gift, a pendant that physically was worth almost nothing, but in fact was the most precious thing to him. After all, it had been given to him by Cindy. Having landed in his hometown, he, in the process of blocking out the names of Jenna who was warring against him, immediately gathered her from her parents in one place with the purpose of presenting them with the fact of infidelity and demanding the dissolution of the marriage. As he approached the appointed place of meeting in the shower, he got such a pleasant, but already forgotten by him, feeling of approaching change. Are you serious? Asked Will, tiredly, rubbing his nose. No, I don't believe you really don't see the problem. William, you're a nervous wreck right now. Why don't you get some sleep, get some rest after your flight? And then our daughter's innocent oversight won't seem like such a problem. Innocent oversight. Betty, are you out of your mind? The boy laughed nervously. Tell me, is that what you think too? Yes. If you think cheating on your honeymoon is an innocent gaffe, watch your mouth. Jenna Benjamin's father entered the conversation. Do you like it or don't like it? You still don't have a say. We made this pact with your parents, not you. Is that so? Will said in a low voice. Why didn't you think to ask us? Do you think your daughter needs this marriage? Yes, she admitted to me herself that she didn't want to get married. You don't seem to understand me, do you? Benjamin took a wide step towards his son-in-law. We and your parents don't care what you wanted, Will, but listen to your elders. Jenna's mom guiltily smiled, pulling her furious spouse by the arm. We've done so much for you, and what a wedding we've had, and what a vacation we've arranged for you. And at the end of the day, don't forget that it's only thanks to us. your parents, that we support you. You, like our Jenna, can exist without working and without knowing any problems. Is it so hard to thank your parents? Well, excuse me, your wife. Well, you know what they say, it's a win-win situation. Oh my God, what a load of crap. Will moved his hair, laughed nervously. It's never gonna get better. Just let your kids be happy. I don't love Jenna, and she doesn't love me. At that moment, the wide doors of the auditorium opened and the guy's parents walked in, straight from the airport. Will had come to this meeting, inviting his parents to a serious conversation straight from the cab. He thought for a long time about where he could gather his relatives, choosing a restaurant from a variety of options. Definitely not. If one knew the context of the conversation, it would become clear that no one present would have an appetite for maybe a bar. Absurd. People like Will's father-in-law, mother-in-law, and parents would never go to such a place. Then maybe a bar, for example, would do. No billiard room either. After all, Will was planning to ask for a divorce, not have fun. After going through all the places he could think of, he settled on the most logical. One of his family's hotels, relatives gathered in an empty room to discuss their problems. When William's parents stepped inside, the attendees were momentarily silent, turning away from Clara's heels. It echoed through the space. John's sullen look could be seen from afar. What's wrong? Will, in a gruff tone, asked the boy his father. I hope this is important enough to distract me from my work. If this is another stupidity, I don't know what I'll do to you. It's just as stupid. Nodding her head vigorously, Betty said. She walked over to Will's mother and with a strained smile smacked Lola on the cheek. This isn't even stupidity. My dears, it's completely absurd. Your son wants a divorce. No, can you imagine? A divorce? John frowned even more. There will be no divorce. Suddenly, without specifying the reasons. Abruptly, he said, if that's all, we'll go. And you, son? He jabbed his index finger at his son for pulling me just so punished. I'm depriving you of your money for a week. This conversation is over. No, it's not. Gaining courage, Will said. He went to the center of the hall, blocking the parents' way, took out of his pocket his smartphone, and opened in it the very photo with the proof of his wife's cheating. Look at that. What kind of wife did you find that pap? Isn't reason enough to file for divorce? More than enough, if you ask me. For a moment, it seemed to everyone present that if anyone said a single word, sparks would fly out of the air. Everyone was so tense. The atmosphere was frightening, heavy, and thick. It seemed that if you took a knife in your hand, you could cut through the air like a slice of bread. Will noticed the formidable look in his father's eyes, rather tongue-in-cheek. He turned around to look at the faces of Jenna's parents. Betty was scrutinizing the shoes on her feet with a particularly important look. Even formidable Benjamin tried to look away, embarrassed. Will waited a couple more seconds, picking the right moment, and said, I think our matter is settled. He threw another glance at his father-in-law, smiling falsely. Then he looked again into his father's eyes. I knew you wouldn't let me be humiliated like this, he said. I realized that Jenna and I's marriage was important to your business, but this kind of cheating on my honeymoon. No, I don't want to ever see that woman again. I'm filing for divorce. John frowned even more and took a step toward me. Is it true? What is it? He asked quietly. We agreed on this marriage. Couldn't you explain to your daughter the elementary rules of married life? And John, Benjamin, the luxury of being angry. I admit it was my fault. But the divorce. You realize divorce is out of the question. At the moment when Will, satisfied with himself, was about to leave the hall, his father approached him again and took his son by the shoulder in a kindly way. Well, Will, think about it. Is it worth getting a divorce because of this, that the boy took from his father like a scalded man? You too. Dad, tell me, what if Mom had cheated on you? You'd say the same thing. He swore. I don't want to live with her. I don't love her. He yelled. She doesn't love me, she said. She also said she's going to keep changing men and live the life she wants. Unlike you, I take marriage seriously. I don't want a wife like that. Clara tried to take her son's hand, but he roughly pulled Will away. Gently, she began. What's the big deal? Yes, and girls. Well, Gulia, another year, another year. And with years, you will already be able to live as a full-fledged family. And even give us grandchildren. I can't believe what you're saying. To my face, Will said quietly and turned around and left the room with a quick step. His mother, as well as Jenna's mother, shouted after him, trying to stop him. But the boy didn't care anymore. Before these persuasions, he realized that all these years he had lived as if in a delusion, trying to please his parents, trying not to lose their money and their patronage. He was losing himself as a person, losing himself as a man. It was in that second, when the young boy looked his mother in the eyes, that he realized that he would never tolerate such treatment again. Period. The realization that his parents were using him as a bargaining chip came over him like a snowball. He realized that his parents had never really cared for him as their son, as a person equal to themselves, a person deserving of respect. Realized that he was just a puppet in the hands of rich and powerful people. They didn't care how their children felt. They didn't care if they were happy. They only cared about their own self-interest, nothing more. Will finally realized that no amount of money was worth giving up on himself. Leaving the hotel, William seemed to instantly mature and finally realized that it was time to make a change. It was that day that he was able to look at his parents from a different angle. It was that day that he realized that he never wanted anything to do with them again. Never in his life, no matter how much he was used to the good and rich life. As much as he didn't want to continue with just drinking, going out, yes, partying. He realized that a golden cage was still a cage. As he left the hotel and thought about all the recent events, he remembered Cindy again. Remembered what he had been like in his teenage years, what he had wanted and aspired to. He used to think he'd been a complete fool at the time. But what can you expect from a 15 or even 17-year-old teenager? Hardly any intelligent and informed thoughts. It's absurd. But now he realized. His thoughts were not influenced by age. His thoughts were influenced by the person next to him. His beloved Cindy, gazing wistfully out the window of a cab at the high-rises passing by. Will noticed a certain pattern in his life. In those happy days when Cindy was still around, he had dreamed and wanted to become a noble, good man. On those days when she was gone, and there were only countless faceless maidens, and then the parentally imposed windy Jenna wanted nothing at all. His only desire was an idle life, a life of hedonism. He didn't want to work or achieve anything. Realizing this pattern, William didn't know what conclusion to draw from it. Maybe go back to Cindy. Oh, if only it were that easy. Maybe he should find himself a girl similar to Cindy? No, that wouldn't work either. It wouldn't be fair to her, or to himself either. Will had thought about everything for a long time, having already arrived at the apartment his parents had given him. Now he sat in the silence of his living room, still clutching the heart-shaped pendant in his hands. Will stood up, poured himself a glass of brandy, drank another, and another, and another. After a few of those glasses, an epiphany seemed to come over him. Why should he need anyone to decide what he wanted? Wasn't Will the master of his own life? Did he necessarily need someone to guide him? No, he didn't. Decided clearly and confidently. Will sipped the last of his drink. It was now up to him to determine what to do with the rest of his life. He was now the master of his own destiny. It had been a little more than 6 months since the last time Will had talked to his parents. A lot had changed, if not everything. Waking up the next morning, Will made a clear decision to become independent and started acting on his own that very day. Quite quickly, he managed to sell everything that his parents had given him and put in his name, namely his apartment, several cars, a couple of expensive watches and things, collecting the money he had managed to get out of those sales. Will decided to start his life with a clean slate and move to another city. Did he ever hope to pay back the money that his parents had to put into the foundation of his future independent existence? Long ago, when Will was just a child, he often dreamed of living by the sea. As a child, he often fantasized about how pirates would break into the town where he would live, how they would rob everyone and everything, how they would take little Will with them and take him into their circle. Now, of course, William's fantasies were somewhat more modest, but he did not want to give up the idea of living by the sea for anything. The proceeds of Will was enough to buy a house on the Black Sea coast and even open his own business. Moving to another city, Will wrote a message to his parents that he no longer wished to see them and that he was cutting off all possible contact with them once and for all. He changed his phone number, his place of residence, everything. Now it was not the Will he had been for the last few years. It was a new Will, self-confident and independent. From now on, he wouldn't let anyone mess with him. True, the young and blonde girl laughed out loud. I would never have thought that you are not from around here, so tanned and handsome. You know so many interesting places. She playfully smiled behind the ear-long, light blonde hair, and I'm just passing through to have a rest, to have fun. Will was upset when he heard the words, but he decided not to let it show. He carefully took his wine glass by its thin stem and said, "Well, that's great. Yes, I wasn't born here, but I live here permanently. Since you're at a resort, why did you agree to come on this date? Don't get me wrong. You're a very pretty girl. But didn't I say I was looking for a serious relationship?" The girl tilted her head to the point of indecency, laughing loudly. "Why can't you and I have a serious relationship?" "Well, how?" Will was surprised. "I mean, we live in different cities. How's a relationship gonna work if we're apart all the time?" "No, I don't think that would work for me." The girl, shooting her eyes, took the guy's hand. "If it worked out, I could move in with you. You have your own place, right? Remind me how you make a living." Will pulled away. "I own my own store. Why do you ask?" The coquette laughed, and again, "Having your own store is great. You're a businessman. What kind of store? May I ask?" Ignoring Will's last question, she asked him about comic books, toys. In a calm tone, he replied, "Collectible toys from movies or comic books." The comics themselves even have rare props from the filming of Comic Book Toys board. In a tone, she repeated the man's last words. "How boring. It's for kids." Will took offense to the circus, saying, "Well, you know, it's not just for kids. Many adults collect figurines. It's actually quite a common hobby." "Of course it is." As if teased, she replied, "And how do you make money with a toy store? If we have a relationship, you can support me." Will for a long time Burra led the interlocutor not trusting look. Then he exhaled tiredly and got up from the table contrary to her expectations. "All right, Marin," he said, taking his wallet out of his pocket. "You and I are not going to work out. I'll be going now." With these words, he counted out a few bills and threw them on the table. "You can pay our bill yourself. Okay, have a nice vacation here. Let's turn around," he said. The girl shrugged lazily, picking up her glass. "It's clear," she said aloud, even though there was no one around. Another beggar brother. Will had been living on the beach for almost 9 months now. In that time, he had already settled in and opened his own store. Even during his move, he couldn't figure out what he liked. He could not decide what he wanted to do for a living. After buying the house and counting the money left over, I realized I was ready to invest in something. But what kind of business? Thinking back over his past life, Will suddenly realized that he didn't really like much in this world. One day, walking along the waterfront, he smiled at his own thoughts and thought that it would be a great idea to open a hotel here. But of course, such an idea was out of the question. Every time he passed by the hotels, of which there were many in the area, he was painfully reminded of his parents, and he wanted to do something of his own, something special. The idea of opening a comic book store came to him spontaneously. One day, he was once again trying to remember what he was into. "I cannot make money on the fact that I like to watch movies." Scolding himself, he thought. And then an epiphany came. That's right. Will thought excitedly, I could open a theme store. And so he had his life's work. Only 6 months ago, he would not have thought that a hobby could bring not only pleasure, but also profit. Of course, the young entrepreneur's income was not as huge as he was used to in his previous life. When money was given to him by his parents, but there was enough to live on. He bought a not particularly expensive, but good car. He found something he liked to do, and even his favorite hobby in the form of cartoons, comics, and movies was with him. Life, it seemed, and once again played with colors. If not for one thing, Will was very lonely in this world like no one else. Every day he thought about Cindy. In every girl he passed by, he looked for her. At some point, Will decided that it was time to change something and went on an active search. He started a page on a dating site, often appeared at various events, getting acquainted with girls. But it was all wrong. These girls were not the same. They were not Cindy. So after almost a year of his new life, he realized he had to try to find her again. After explaining to the employees of his stores that he would be away for a while, he bought a ticket and flew to his hometown. Getting off the plane, Will clutched in his hand the pendant that hung around his neck. And now William stood in front of a shabby old house and looked at the shabby surroundings with a sense of nostalgia. It seemed that in all the years he'd been away, this house, like the neighborhood, hadn't changed a bit. It seemed that even under the ugly entryway grew the same ugly flowers from the cars. And the same old ladies sat at the entrance. Will was visibly nervous. Every now and then he bit his lip almost to the point of bleeding. After all, the point was that he had finally decided to find her. His first and only love, his Cindy. Having flown to his hometown, the guy decided not to attract unnecessary attention to himself and under a false name stayed in a cheap hotel. The first thing he did was to find Cindy on social networks, but to no avail. Her old page in that network, where they used to communicate with teenagers, was deleted long ago, and there were no others. In the 7 years that Cindy and Will had been estranged, a lot had changed, including the internet itself. If before they sat in an uncomplicated messenger, now the network was literally bursting with a variety of sites and social networks. Alas, the search did not bear fruit, and Will took a break. All that was possible was left with his nose. He had already lost all hope of finding the field, as he suddenly remembered the old and reliable option, just to come to her house. And there he was, a changed man, all grown up and on his own, standing under her driveway, still hesitant to go inside. After long minutes of nervousness and trepidation in anticipation of the imminent meeting, he decided to make a step and enter the house. His nose was hit by the forgotten but familiar smell of cheap tobacco and alcohol. Will involuntarily wrinkled his nose, and his memories immediately went back to his wedding day. That moment when he had seen Cindy under the metaphor of fallen autumn red and yellow leaves. He decided then that it was a vision. What if it wasn't? What if the same fate awaited Cindy as most of the residents of this unfortunate neighborhood? What if she was mired in money debts, in a post-war unloved job? What if she had started smoking that vile cheap tobacco? Will shuddered, with a heavy sigh. He went up to the floor he wanted and rang the bell at Cindy's apartment. For the first couple minutes, the door wasn't answered. And just when Will was ready to accept defeat and go back to the hotel, the lock suddenly clicked and a poorly dressed, memorized, and bad-smelling woman appeared on the doorstep. "Who the hell are you?" In a rough voice, she asked. "What do you want?" The guy at first wanted to retreat, but suddenly an image appeared in his memories, and he, being in complete shock, quietly asked Wendy, "Wendy, is that you?" "Ah, me? Who are you?" Distrustful, asked Cindy's mother. Will could not believe his eyes. Was it really her? Was she all of a kind, dirty, swollen, angry? Of course, Will had never considered Cindy's mom to be the ideal woman. But what would be, judging by her looks and even her smell, was understandable. Wendy drank almost without fail, but why did she drink? What terrible thing could have happened in her life? He took a step back away from the foul odor and decided to introduce himself. "Wendy, it's me." "Well, you remember me from high school. I dated your daughter, Cindy." "Where is she, by the way?" "Will?" Quietly, she said the name of the interlocutor. "Ah, you're the new one. I'll show you now," with these words, as if distraught woman kicked out inside the apartment and, grabbing a broom in her hands, ran out into the stairwell dam. "It's all because of you." Screaming, she swung and swung her dusty projectile in every direction. "My daughter gave up on me because of you. She gave birth to a freak. And how dare you even come here?" Will, avoiding the mad woman's blows, panted and shouted, "What are you talking about? Where did she go? Cindy? I need to find her. She's not here, you idiot," she shouted, spotting her on the spot and breathing heavily from upstairs. I heard a grunt. "Stop yelling," and Wendy, dragging a broom behind her and breathing heavily, went back into the apartment. "I don't think so. Where did she move to?" Still hoping for an answer, Will asked. "I don't know. She doesn't talk to me anymore. After I suggested she get an abortion." Wendy threw one last angry look at Will. "Don't you dare come here. I hate you all." With those words, she slammed the front door in his face. After his encounter with Wendy, he had been puzzled for a long time. What had happened to her? Why had she gone to bed? What did the woman mean by blaming the guy for all her problems? Why Cindy, let off and do not understand the mother, but always loved her, suddenly abandoned her? And what the hell kind of abortion was she talking about? Alas, there were many questions that frightened him. Like a true detective himself, he began his search, but for the most part, he was met with failure. Cindy seemed to have fallen into the ground. It was so hard to find her. After a long week in his hometown, it dawned on William. What if I went to the housing authority? Thinking back to his wedding day, he wondered if he had imagined the scene and if the field really did work as a janitor. Municipal workers were obliged to know her residential address, or at least a contact number for an internet search. He found the buildings he needed and stayed up all night because of his nerves. He went to the housing office in the early hours of the morning. There Will finally had luck waiting for him. A large woman with bright red hair for some reason rolled her eyes dismissively when she heard about the guy's request. "Why should I give you the address of our employee?" asked the violinist's voice. "Who are you anyway? Where did you come from? And what if you're some kind of maniac?" the woman asked, adjusting the large beads on her thick neck, looking more like a toad than a middle-aged woman. Will nickered at first, but on reflection, smiled broadly and slipped the woman a crisp, generic bill. She was transformed all at once. Her voice was no longer so nasty. The small eyes were filled with warmth and kindness. Will came out of the housing office smiling broadly, holding a commemorative piece of paper with his address and cell phone number written crookedly on it. Luck at last, he decided, and went straight to the address on the piece of paper. But there excitedly, Will was waiting for another failure. The door was opened to him by a gray-haired man, and shrugging with his mountainous, long shoulders from old age indifferently, answered, "No, Cindy is not here." At that moment, Will's loving heart sickened with sadness and longing. A woman appeared in the doorway behind the old man's shoulders. "Are you looking for Cindy?" she asked. It turned out that the field had indeed lived at this address, once renting a room from these people. It had been a long time since then, and the person had long since moved out. Now Will had only one option left: to call the phone number that was written down on a piece of paper that was given to him by the housing office worker. But the disappointed guy already had little hope. Leaving the house, where he came to look for his beloved, he did not immediately decide to dial this number, afraid to cut the last thin thread that connects him with the image of his beloved. But when he finally decided, contrary to his own expectations, he heard his favorite voice. "Hello." In a tired voice, Cindy answered the incoming call. "Who is it?" The boy's hands shook with joy, his heart filled with love. Stunned, he stopped on the spot, and with both hands grabbed the cell phone with force, squeezing it into his ear. "Hello, hello, Cindy," almost crying with happiness. Was it for him? "Who is it?" she repeated her question. "We know each other." "Yes," Will answered cheerfully, already seated on a nearby bench. "It's me, Will. You haven't forgotten me, have you?" When she heard the name of her former lover, she was silent for a few long seconds. "How did you get my number?" In a calm voice, she asked after a pause. "What do you want?" I began to stammer Will. He nervously chattered, coming to his throat. "Calm. I recognized him from your former place of employment. Cindy. I wanted to talk to you about which job." She decided to clarify. "Unlike you, I've worked a lot of jobs and still do." "Oh well." Will fell silent and decided not to give away. Helped him the housing office worker, and transferred the topic to Cindy. "When and where can we meet?" "We need to talk." "What do you want us to talk about?" "Indifferent?" Cindy asked. "I don't want to see you again." Will, who was sitting on the bench, had tears in his eyes. "Never." In a quiet voice, he asked, When he heard her answer in the affirmative, he jumped up from the bench as if scalded. "I love you, Cindy," he exclaimed. "I love you, and I always have. Why do you want to see me? You're the one who left me. Why should you resent me so?" The next line of the field sounded very strange. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "How dare you, after so many years, continue to lie to me after what you did to me? You are incorrigible," she exclaimed and dropped the call. For the first couple minutes after the conversation, Will could only flap his eyes in surprise. Then he shook his head, trying to regain his mental clarity, and dialed his beloved's number again. "Hello," he said, without waiting for it to start, but another obstacle to reconciliation awaited him. For from his cell phone heard only indifferent, "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." Then he began to call again and again, but all in vain. Apparently, Cindy simply blocked the persistent guy. He threw her a few difficult texts, begging for forgiveness, but that didn't help either. Then Will, not knowing himself from resentment and pain in his soul, decided to act drastically. He walked stiffly toward his hotel, but something made him turn around and look at where he was sitting, talking on the phone with his ex-girlfriend. He took a long, hard look at the bench he was sitting on, and suddenly he realized that it was the same bench where they used to like to sit together. The very bench on which Cindy had sat, which he had given her lover a pendant. The very bench that had left so many pleasant memories in the heart of the lover. His soul found itself writhing in pain, and he continued to indulge in those sweet memories until he resolutely turned on the spot and sped away. William remembered that he was a different person now. He remembered that he would no longer allow anyone to influence his life, not his parents, not his wife. What had they found for him? They wouldn't even allow the memories, which resonated painfully in his heart. Influenced by the self-confident William decided to act, namely to seek help from his old acquaintance from school. That Stephen guy, the one Will had come to see, always had a passion for computers and programming. It is not surprising that, having grown up, he became a programmer and, as it turned out, was really able to help his former classmate, paying Stirrup as much as he asked and giving him Cindy's phone number. Will waited. After a while, Stephen called him and said that he had managed to find out the exact location of the object, and then threw him the right address. William was incredibly happy and almost immediately drove to the right place. Sitting in the cab and looking at the map opened in his smartphone, he was very surprised. The neighborhood in which Cindy now lived was even worse, and even more dangerous than the previous one. "I don't know what to think." Will walked out in confused feelings to the right house. He looked around and saw a small tent with flowers. He bought a bouquet for the field and then resolutely went up to the right floor on an old and dirty elevator. For the first couple of seconds, Will just stared mesmerized at the door, behind which was probably his Cindy, changed and shifted from foot to foot in indecision. He, clutching the bouquet in his hands until his bones ached, decided to ring the doorbell. Contrary to expectations, the apartment door opened quite quickly, and on the threshold appeared she herself, his Cindy. Tired, exhausted, even by Nick's standards, but still as beautiful as she had been 7 years ago. To him, at least. "Will," she asked hesitantly. "Oh my God, it's true. Are you Cindy?" Will took a small step toward her, trying to pull her into his arms, but was instantly slapped on the forehead. "Ow," he exclaimed. "Why do you keep taking that ah?" Although I seem to know who it is in your field, surprise glittered his eyes. "What do you mean?" Will, still standing on the threshold of the apartment, warmly laughed as that, of course, your mother. "Oh, you ought to know how she gave me a hard time, cutting me right between the eyes with a broom." "Oh, Mama," quietly she said to her long brown former lover with an untrusting look. She finally gave in, opening the front door wider and offering him passage. "Well, the hell with you," she said, laughing. "You can't go through." Will smiled broadly and slipped the bouquet into Cindy's hand. When he followed the girl into the kitchen, he was horrified by the situation. Had things really gotten that bad for Cindy? Yes, he still thought she was incredibly beautiful, but it was impossible not to notice something. Cindy had changed a lot over the years. There was no excitement in her eyes. Gone was the flame of hope for a better future. Gone was the spark. She looked tired of life. A woman who had seen the sights, though she was only 24 years old when the former lovers sat opposite each other at the narrow kitchen table. Will asked, embarrassed, "You are divorced, married?" Unconcerned, she replied, "Divorced for a long time now." Ah, he visibly embarrassed. Will apologized for asking. But what happened? Cindy sighed tiredly. Nothing much. She reached into the candy jar on the table, pulled one out, opened it, but didn't eat it, leaving her to gasp. I got married as soon as I graduated high school. I was in a situation where I couldn't afford to be alone. As you probably already know, I had a huge fight with my mom. But I needed support, so I hastily married him. After a year of marriage, he got tired of the problems I brought him, started drinking. Then I found out about his cheating. When I told him I knew, he started hitting me. I was only good enough for 6 months of living like that. And after that time, I filed for divorce. When she finished her monologue, she smiled sadly. It's better to deal with problems on your own than with that kind of support. Right? Anyway, I never remarried. After you left me, I realized I could never fall in love again. She shrugged. So what's up with you? Now, wait a minute, Will said indignantly. I'm the one who dumped you. Actually, you're the one who dumped me, he said indignantly. And I mean you gave your husband a hard time. I think he gave you trouble. Cindy was silent for a few long seconds. Never mind, she said at last, as if to say how I'd left you. You're completely out of your mind. You don't have to make a fool of me. I clearly remember the message you wrote to me before you left. What message? He scratched the back of his head uncertainly. Immersing himself in his own memories, no. I didn't write anything. I lost my phone at the airport that day. And after I found out you weren't flying, I was terrified. I bought a new smartphone when I arrived, but you had already deleted yourself from the network. I don't know what you had in mind, but I didn't text you. Lost my phone, the girl said quietly. But then who wrote that text message? Finally, after a long 7 years, the young people managed to dot all the I's. As it turned out, neither of them wanted to think about breaking up. Putting all the facts together, they guessed their parents were behind their breakup. Surprised, humiliated, depressed. They didn't even know what to think about separating them. The lovers lived apart. They suffered terribly. Each of them blamed the other for the way their lives had gone wrong. All this time, Will tried to find the reason why he was abandoned. All these years, he had been looking for the reason in himself. Cindy was certainly no different. For 7 years, she blamed herself for what had happened, asking herself the same question every day. Why did he fall out of love with me? Is it impossible to love me at all? Will and Cindy simply could not believe that their parents had done this to them. They couldn't believe that such seemingly different people had come together for a common goal. And more importantly, what that purpose was. To trample tender teenage feelings, humiliate them, making them feel unwanted and abandoned. After finding out all the details, the former lovers succumbed to their newly rekindled feelings. As it turned out later, each of them dreamed of this meeting. Each of them wanted to see their other half again. When the emotions faded a little, Will and Field began to tell each other about their lives. Will told his childhood friend everything, how he lived for a long time in England, how he got married on account, and how his wife betrayed him on their honeymoon. He also did not forget to tell about the fact that he stopped communicating with his parents and how he started a new independent life. Listening to his story, the Field couldn't hold back a smile. I'm so proud of you, Will, she said sincerely. As it turned out later, Cindy's problem was not only in her failed marriage. Will was surprised to learn that the girl was raising a child alone. That's great, he marveled. You have no idea how happy I am. We've dreamed of having a child. Wait, she said with apparent sadness. But Will joyfully continued to Cindy. I'm not stupid. I'm well aware that the child is from another man. But what's the difference? It's your son, so I'll love him as if he were my own. No, Cindy said, almost crying. That's not what I mean. My Larry is very sick, she said quietly. That's why he's not at home right now. He's in the hospital. He needs heart surgery, and for sobs. And as you realize, the surgery is not free. That's why I live the way I do." She looked around. "I saw with bitterness the look on your face as you looked at this interior. You think I'm thrilled. But right now, all the money is going to Larry's treatment. I have to work several jobs, but I still don't have enough money. My shift was canceled today by coincidence. The lights went out at the store, so you caught me here on a forced vacation." Bitterly, she laughed. Cindy raised her red, inflamed eyes to her interlocutor. Seeing that the guy was about to say something, she quickly shook her head, warning, raising her hand up. "Well, no, I know what you have to offer. I won't take money from you, especially since I only have so much left to save up." Will is dumbfounded, looking at the poor mother of a sick child. He'd like to help her. He really wanted to help her. But remembering the past, he stopped half speaking and only said quietly, "Okay." "What do you say?" She smiled gratefully. "Thank you. You really have changed a lot." The couple spent a few more hours together, talking about everything in the world, and more. At some point it seemed to them that time had stopped, and the whole world around them seemed to have frozen. They were so good together that it was a logical conclusion. Will and Cindy fit together as well as the pendants. The young mommy was the key that perfectly fit William's heart. A few hours later, they had to say goodbye. Cindy had to leave for another shift at work. Will didn't argue, didn't persuade her to quit her job. Now he knew from experience that it wouldn't work with Cindy. After saying goodbye and arranging to meet again soon, he drove back to the hotel. But not so he could fall into bed and turn on the TV. When he arrived, he again turned to the internet for help. For now, he had a new goal: to find the hospital where Cindy's son was hospitalized, and to deposit the full amount of money necessary for the boy to undergo surgery. Of course, he knew that the principal field would not take money just like that, but he couldn't stay away either. It didn't matter how Cindy herself felt about it. The only thing that mattered was that the child should live. The next day, Will, having found out in which hospital Cindy's son was lying, went there to pay for a heart operation. The operation turned out to be quite expensive. The guy had to invest all his saved money, but he knew it was worth it. A new car or business expansion could wait. But a sick child cannot wait. Surprised and delighted, the doctor, to whom William explained his financial involvement through long-standing family ties, offered to visit the boy in his room. Will could not help himself and asked the nurse to escort him out. What a shock William was in, seeing the little boy in the hospital bed. Little Larry wonderfully tilted his head to the side. He looked long and apprehensively at Will, not knowing what to say. Then he raised himself a little in the bed and smiled broadly. "Who are you?" asked the boy, seeing this strange, similar as 2 drops of water to other such patients in the face. Will was overwhelmed and dumbfounded. He was not immediately able to squeeze out answers. "I am Will," he could only answer stupidly. But that was just enough for this boy. As it turned out, he had more than just a bad heart. The kid had Down's syndrome. In Will's mind, the puzzle was finally coming together. Those words Wendy had spoken. The age of the baby exhaled. William smiled and took another step towards it. "Hi," he said more confidently. "I'm a friend of your mom's, Sunchild." Made a funny grimace at Mommy. Warmly said the boy, "Why are you here?" and frowned perplexed. But not for long. 2 seconds later on his funny pilot again played a smile. They are the children of the sun. They don't know how to be sad for long. Will shrugged. "I wanted to meet you. Larry, how are you feeling? How are you doing?" He moved even closer to the baby. In his mind, he scolded himself for not having thought to buy the child a present. He smiled kindly and dared to ask Larry, "How old are you?" The boy was silent for a long time, thinking and muttering to himself. But then, nodding to himself, he answered, "I'm 7 years old." Will almost fainted. It seems that all these years he had been growing up without any support from him. Such a special son. The operation was a success. Cindy first scolded, then sobbed, then threatened to return the entire sum to Wilka as soon as she had saved up. But she couldn't help sobbing with happiness on his shoulder in the end. Will didn't press her or give a word away about his hunch, which only grew stronger. When the doctor showed him the patient's chart and the date of birth, and even the middle name matched William's thoughts. After a while, the field did venture to confess. Larry was indeed Will's son. As it turned out, she found out she was pregnant. A couple weeks after Will flew to Haiti with her parents. When she found out about the pregnancy, she initially wanted to tell him. But remembering that conversation between father and son, unwittingly witnessed by her, Olia decided to keep silent about the future child forever. Resentment after her beloved allegedly abandoned her did not let her go, nor did they let her go. Knowing what his father once said, "She will fly in and suck money out of us." These cruel words John Girl remembered for the rest of her life. When her mother found out that Cindy had a new life under her heart, she was furious, or go for an abortion, or get out of my house, screamed the tormented woman-proud Cindy. Though she was too young and had not a penny, she chose the second option. She packed her things and moved out of her mother's house when she was pregnant, cutting off all contact with her forever. Cindy had worked before, so she was able to rent her own place. And then Larry was born, and she found out what kind of son she had. Cindy was torn apart. She had to take care of the baby and work to pay the rent. Then, as if by magic, she became close to an acquaintance named Dima, who was not embarrassed by the fact that his future wife had a child, nor his diagnosis. He had long ago laid his eyes on this beauty. Then everything was like a fog. The spouse turned out to be problematic. There was little work, and the baby demanded more and more attention. Olia was torn at 5 jobs to support her family. One day, she suddenly remembered that she had not only dear to her heart, but also material things. The very chains she had once quarreled with her lover over. It was with a pang in her heart that Cindy decided to sell them. But to her horror, she discovered that the chains were missing. Later, she found out that they were stolen by her deadbeat husband, who spent all the money on drinking and entertainment. Her life had not turned out well, but she had never once betrayed herself, her son, or her principles. Maybe a life of self-respect is more important than material possessions. When Larry was discharged from the hospital, Will managed to insist that Cindy and their son move to his place on the Black Sea coast. Cindy and Will got back together and were already planning to get married. But suddenly there was another obstacle in their way. William had completely forgotten that he had never divorced Jenna. He had to go to her to ask for a quiet divorce. As it turned out later, Jenna, like himself, also quarreled with her parents, and they deprived her of funding. Unscrupulous girl went for a trick. "Pay me a tidy sum. Then I'll go with you." Will, so tired of all this manipulation and money intrigue, agreed. Throughout his life, he was so tired of the fact that all his surroundings could only think about money. Money, money, money. Always heard Will when he was a kid, and it wasn't until he was 25 that he realized that money was not the most important thing in life. Having agreed to Jenna's demands on the condition that the divorce would be quiet, and no one's parents would know about it until the divorce itself was finalized. Will sold the house. He slipped the insolent girl's money, and on the remaining modest sum bought a small apartment on the same coast. Handing Jenna the bill, he felt a stone fall from his soul. That day, when he flew back to the city, where his beloved family was waiting for him, he realized a lot of things, for his parents had never been truly happy. Yes, they were obscenely rich, but as it turned out, that didn't bring them happiness. Now that Will had become a father himself, he began to judge his parents even more strongly than before. How could they control the fate of their own child, knowing that he would suffer? This thought could not fit in his head. Only people who were very angry at life could do such a thing. Maybe he had never been able to forgive his parents, but it certainly taught the young father a lesson. Children are the most important things in life. You should never interfere in their lives. You should never dictate your rules to them. The only thing you should give your own children is unconditional love and support. And judgment is best kept to yourself, as much as you'd like to do that. Cindy and Will got married after 5 years together. They had another baby boy. The family lived quite modestly, but it didn't matter to them. After all, they had long ago realized that happiness is far from money. Will continued to engage in his comic book store, although this business did not bring good profits. Cindy went to study nursing and got a job at the local health center. Neither Cindy's mom, and they never saw each other again, nor were they particularly keen to. Children are better off without grandparents like that, the two of them decided. Larry grew up a happy and sociable boy, despite his peculiarity, and his little sister was very interested in music. This family finally found the simple happiness they deserved.